Shalom, shalom, and thank you for joining me today in our study titled The Time Machine of the Most High, the Camp, the Tabernacle, and the Four Living Creatures. In part 1, we talked about how the Creator set up the Hebrew wilderness camp in such an orderly array that it kept his timing for the Sabbaths, feasts, and jubilees. The will in the will, our Creator's galactic timepiece. Then the alignment of the 4-star leaders named in Enoch 82 to the 4 leading tribes of the Hebrew camp, and the marking of the ages with the 4 living creatures shown to John the Revelator and the prophet Ezekiel. In part 2, we will delve deep into the parts and pieces of the hub of the will itself, the tabernacle. Why are we given all this information about this one structure? And why is it important to know? This is where all the fun begins, and all the math. So get ready, because here we go. As with all wills, in order for them to be functional, there needs to be a hub. Although it is a small piece, the hub of a will is a crucial component of the whole vehicle. Will hubs are cylindrical structures that fit around the axle's end and allow the wheels to mount securely onto them. Generally, this piece comes in a disc shape with a slightly protruding center section that has several studs. The wilderness camp was set so that its hub is the tabernacle itself, with the tribal camps radiating out from its holy center, the 4 leading tribes positioned at the head of the cardinal directions, creating a supersized compass. The Hebrew word for compass is hagag, and means to move in a circle, to march in a sacred procession, celebrate, dance, keep, hold a solemn feast. The Hebrew word hag, to pilgrim, from where hagag originates, means to move in a year's circle, to celebrate and observe the circular feasts. Hagag related to the 3 pilgrim feasts that requires us to be in Yahuwah's presence at the place where he places his name: Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as these are the 3 main parts of the wedding ritual between the bride and the bridegroom. Passover is the day of the bride selection, where the bride price is paid. Shavuot, the day the betrothal oath is given, legally binding the couple, but not consummated. Finally, Sukkot, the wedding feast itself, and the union is now completed. For some 420 years, from Moses to up until the time Solomon built the temple, the tabernacle was that place where the circular feasts were observed. Remember that the camp and the tabernacle is the reflection of their heavenly counterparts, the components of Yahuwah's timepiece. Exodus 12:2. This month is to you the beginning of months. It is to you the first among the months of the year. Exodus 40:2. On the first day of the month, on the first of the month, you shall rise up the tent of the tabernacle of the congregation. It was ordered that the tabernacle to be set up with the due east alignment on the first day of the first month. And as if with forethought, Yahuwah had placed a big fiery orb in the heavens that just happened to mark due east twice a year. Beginning with the exact season where the first day of the year is supposed to be. The spring. Imagine that. Yahuwah set the wilderness camp so that the standards of the tribe of Judah and the camp of Moses aligned with the east-facing door of the tabernacle. This would allow them to witness the sign that marks the fourth day of creation. The due east rising of the sun would project a straight-line shadow off the poles of their standards. I can about imagine a straight-line shadow coming off of Judah's standard that touches Moses' standard, which in turn, its own straight-line shadow projects onto the tabernacle's east door. Can you imagine it? Just the mere fact that the tabernacle was to face the rising dewy sun on the first day of the year should tell us that the tabernacle is a key part of our Creator's timepiece. Yahuwah went into great detail as to how the tabernacle was to be constructed. And although the plans for the temple were inspired by Eloah, Yahuwah didn't instruct David as he did Moses, with all the little detail work. 1 Chronicles 28:2. And David the king rose up on his feet and said, "Hear me, my brothers and my people. With my heart I desire to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of Yahuwah, and for the footstool of our Eloah. And I made preparations to build." Verse 3. But Eloah said to me, "You shall not build a house to my name, for you are a man of battles, and you have shed blood." Verse 6. And he said to me, "Your son Solomon shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him as a son to me, and I surely will be a father to him." Verse 19. All was in writing from the hand of Yahuwah. He caused me to understand all the work of the pattern. Verse 11. And David gave his son Solomon the pattern. Now perhaps because the temple was a stationary structure, unlike the nomadic tabernacle, fewer details were needed. Perhaps the reason for such details for Moses and a lack of for David is that some of the functions of the tabernacle were no longer in play with the temple. For one, the tribes would no longer be camped around about the temple as they did the tabernacle in the days of Moses. The camp was a time-keeping compass, and although the temple was the hub of religious worship, the tabernacle was the hub of the wilderness camp itself. Now, I was taught many years ago that the components of the tabernacle were tied to the Creator's timepiece. Nevertheless, the parts and pieces of that presentation, which were mostly focused on the coverings, have long exited my memory banks. At the time, I was wandering around the lunar wilderness, just starting my walk. But the idea of it never left, thinking one day Yahuwah would direct me back to it when the time was right. And it seems that now is that time. While the account of building the tabernacle can be tedious to read, their meticulous description is itself testimony to the spiritual importance of these sections. There are not many places in the Old Testament where anything is accounted for in such painstaking detail, making the text about the tabernacle stand out from the rest of Scripture. We find that 13 consecutive verses are dedicated to the two main fabric parts of the tabernacle construction, whereas the leather roof covering only gets one verse. So let's look at the instructions that Eloah gave to Moses to see if we can find any calendrical orientations. The linen curtains. Exodus 26:1. And for the tent you shall make 10 curtains. And this word is Hebrew 3407, meaning a hanging of linen being twined, and blue and purple and scarlet, being twined with cherubim. A work of a weaver you shall make them. First, I think it is important to understand that these are called to be hanging curtains that were used to cover the sides of the tabernacle. Now, I asked my husband what would be his first thought of the linen curtains. And he answered just as I would have, that they were a delicate, flowing curtain made of linen. And it wasn't until I researched linen textiles more that I realized that they were not fragile, flowing curtains, but rather tough, durable, flax linen canvas. Linen canvas fabric dates back thousands of years. Linen, a natural fiber made from the flax plant, was first used by the ancient Egyptians in the production of clothing and other textiles. It was during this time that the invention of linen canvas took place. The Egyptians discovered that by stretching and weaving linen fibers together, they could create a sturdy and durable material. The fabric's combination of durability and breathability makes it an excellent choice for various applications. The strong fibers can withstand wear and tear of daily use while allowing air to circulate, keeping you comfortable. This breathability also helps to reduce the risk of mold and mildew growth. One of the main benefits of linen canvas fabric is its durability. It is a strong and sturdy material that can withstand regular use and wear. This makes it perfect for curtains and upholstery, as it can handle the constant opening and closing of curtains and the weight and movement of people sitting upon upholstered furniture. The sturdy nature of linen canvas ensures that it can withstand frequent handling and stretching without easily tearing or fraying. Another benefit of linen canvas fabric is its natural beauty. It has a unique texture and a natural sheen that adds a touch of elegance. In addition to its practical benefits, linen canvas also became a symbol of prestige and professionalism in the art world. Many famous artists, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt, preferred to work on linen canvas rather than cotton due to its superior quality. Even today, linen canvas remains highly regarded and is often the preferred choice for serious artists who want to create museum quality paintings. Now, the Hebrew word for this curtain, 3407, is uriah, and is a feminine word meaning a hanging, from the root yara, 3415, meaning to quiver, to be broken up. Now, most likely from the same root that we get the Hebrew word yareach, or moon, as the moon's light is broken up by phases. The word yareach is quite ancient. Preceding Hebrew, it is found in multiple other Semitic languages, such as Southern Arabic. The Ge'ez and Akkadian languages also contain the word yareach, which also means moon in their languages. This definitely ties in with the next verse. Exodus 26:2. The length of one curtain shall be 28 by the cubit, and the width 4 by the cubit. For the one curtain, one measure to all the curtains. So all the curtains are going to be 28 cubits by 4 cubits. Now, we know within the creation cycle that there are 4 quarters to the division of time, where every 28 days The moon moves through one of its sidereal stations. Just as the camp kept the lunar time, the linen curtains reflect this same lunar cycle. 28 is also reflected through the human female's reproduction cycle. From one menses to the next, on average, is 28 days. And the reason why a woman's cycle is called her moon cycle. The moon becomes full on the 14th, 15th day of its cycle. This also is in relation to the time of a woman's cycle when she is ovulating and can become pregnant. A human pregnancy is considered full term at 40 weeks or 280 days. 10 curtains times 28 cubits is 280, a human gestation period. The linen curtains can then be thought of as the womb of the tabernacle that surrounds the Holy of Holies, which is reflected back onto the camp setup where the Levites surround the tabernacle itself. I believe that the material and design is witness to the Levites' allegorical connection. Leviticus 6:10, and the priest shall put on his long robe of fine linen, and he shall put his linen underpants on his flesh. Exodus 39:2. And he made an ephod of gold, blue, and purple, and crimson, and twined bleached linen. Now we need to pay special attention to this next verse, as it tells us exactly how these two pieces sister together. Exodus 26 verse 3. 5 curtains shall be joined together, each to her sister, and 5 curtains shall be joined each to its sister piece. So of the 10 curtains, 5 each are to be joined to its sister. Now to sister something is to join it together. Therefore we find that 5 and 5 are joined together in order to make larger pieces of fabric. Verse 4. And you shall make loops of blue on the edge of one curtain, and on the end at the juncture. And so you shall do at the edge of the last curtain at the second juncture. Now Moses was instructed to place loops at the end of the curtain panels. King James translates this into the selvage end. This confuses some to believe that he's talking about the long edge of the curtain. They see the word selvage and run blindly with it. So let's rightfully divide the word and take a closer look at what King James is really saying. Exodus 26:4. And you shall make loops of blue upon the edge of one curtain from the selvaged in the coupling, and likewise shalt thou make in the uttermost edge another curtain in the coupling of the second. So a fabric's selvage is also called the warp. It is commonly found at both the long edges of the fabric. Now, I was taught to sew when I was really young by my grandmother and have been sewing my whole life. So fabric I understand. And fabric is created with a warp thread that runs the length of the fabric, and the weft threads that run across the fabric and turns at the end. So you have your warp threads that are your long threads, and your weft is what goes back and forth to make the fabric. The turning point is where a tighter weave is created to stop fraying. This is the selvage. It is parallel to the warp yarn, providing strength to the woven structure. The warp must be strong to be held under high tension during the weaving process, because it's the ones that are stretched out. Unlike the weft, which carries almost no tension, it's the one that's being weaved in. Because the weft does not need to be stretched on the loom, the way the warp is, so it can generally be less strong. Now, although the selvaged end gives the fabric added strength, it also makes no sense for the loops to be along this side, as it would place tension on the weaker weft threads. That's where the tension is being pulled if the loops are put on the selvaged end, on those weaker weft threads, thereby placing the loops on the 4 cubic end would allow all the stronger warp threads to carry that tension load, with the stiffer selvage side strengthening and adding stability to the top and the bottom of the fabric, giving it a nice finished edge. So another thing King James tells us, which I see as a big clue that I guess others seem to overlook, is that it is sistered from, not along, the selvaged edge. So it sisters from. That is the starting point, the selvage at the top, and run them along the uttermost edge. Uttermost is the terminal, it means the terminal edge, from the Hebrew 70-20. And it also refers to the Hebrew 69-72, which means, as a primitive root, kutz, that means to cut off. So the cutting off is when we finish on a simple frame loom, the longer warped edges are cut, and then they're tied together to keep everything from unraveling. So the instructions are actually pointing us to make the sister loops on the short edge where the fabric will be cut off of the loom. Thus, the curtains are attached at the looped ends, just as the scripture states. Okay, so now this is starting to get exciting because we now know how the 10 pieces of linen are linked together into 2 long pieces consisting of 5 panels of fabric. Each of the 2 sections measuring 140 cubits, so 28 cubits was each panel, sistered 5 together gives us 140 cubits by 4 cubits tall. So before we look at the cubit, I want to take a moment to explore the number 140 itself. 140 is a harmonic divisor number. Now, harmonic numbers have been studied since antiquity. And I'm not going to pretend I understand all this math. I get math and rhythms. But this is above me without some longer studying. But a little of my back history, though, just may explain as to why this makes so much sense to me. Many, many years ago, when I was married to my son's father, he was a structural steel draftsman. Back in the days before there was CAD, before it was automated. And so, consequently, he did all of his work by hand. And a draftsman is a person who draws blueprints. And he did freelance work from our home. He was really good in his field, and he was well known to do good work. And so he did some freelance work from home, and he taught me how to check his math. Because the first rule of drawing blueprints is the draftsman never checks his own math. Because once you start down the wrong rabbit trail, you're going to always go down that wrong rabbit trail. So he taught me how to correct his work. And I would look over his blueprints and run the numbers to verify that he was correct. And learned a thing or two along the way about making blueprints. So all structures start with architectural design concepts. And that concept is then sent to the draftsman who makes it work mathematically and structurally. And this is exactly what we are finding within these scriptures. Blueprints. And I also taught junior high math for our homeschool group years ago, and along with gardening, but I was the math teacher for our homeschool group for the junior high kids. And I think that's why I'm so interested really in biblical math and all these numbers. So back to the number 140. The number 140 has the divisors 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 10, 14, 20, 28, 35, 70, and 140. So these are the divisors. Their harmonic mean is 5. It's a harmonic number. 5 28-cubit curtains equals 140 cubits. 140 cubits. A harmonic number. Harmonic divisor numbers are equivalent to even perfect numbers. Now, an even perfect number is a whole number which equals the sum of its proper divisors. For example, 28 is divisible by 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14. So when we add up those numbers, 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14, it equals 28. That makes it a perfect number, or an even perfect number, because it's an even number. Now, each individual linen curtain is 28 cubits by 4 cubits. 5 combined curtains are 140 cubits by 4 cubits. Combined length of all the 10 curtains, then, is 280 cubits. Okay, so now dig this. The denominator of the 8th harmonic number is 280, which is an octagonal number. Keep this in mind. So the linen curtains are perfect harmonic numbers. Are we surprised? Not in the least. So I have to ask, are the linen curtains used in an octagonal shape, like a yurt, perhaps? A yurt is a self-supporting structure balancing opposing forces from its constructional elements. It is supported by a collapsible wooden frame and covered with layers of canvas and wool felt. Typically, the side walls are 6 feet tall with a domed top rising another 3 feet. The traditional dwelling of nomads, yurt communities are often herding cultures. Medieval yurt camps were commonly arranged in a hurry, which means a circle, with the leader's yurt in the center. So let's continue to see how the rest of the blueprints read. Today, one of the most misunderstood and confused measurements of ancient origin is the cubit. Some claim the cubit is approximately 18 inches, while others 20 inches. Most evidence today point to a variation of these two measurements. The two most widely recognized forms of the cubit are merely an expression of the relationship between the year of 365.25 days and pi. Pi is 3.14159, the constant of a circle. Most agree that the royal cubit was 20.6 inches. Now, the Egyptian pi rod cubit, or circumferential cubit, is a linear cubit measure that was equal to 18.2625 inches and was a linear expression of the relationship between the radius of a year circle and its circumference. So the cubit of 20.607 inches and 18.262 inches both have origins in practical geometry and linear measure. So which Cubit then was used for building the tabernacle. Many think it was the royal cubit, but interestingly, the curtains themselves tell us. So let's take a look. Exodus 26:5. You shall make 50 loops on one curtain, and you shall make 50 loops at the end of the curtain at the second juncture. The corresponding loops, each to her sister. Verse 6, and you shall make 50 hooks, or knobs of gold, and you shall join the curtains each to her sister by knobs, or by the hooks, and it shall become one tabernacle. So the 50 hooks and 50 loops hooked together to make one tabernacle. And there's one end of the 5 set of curtains has loops, and one end has hooks. And that goes for both sets of the 5. So the 5 and 5 are connected through these loops and hooks. So here is where we get the math for the cubit directly from the Creator himself. So we know a solar year is 365.24 days. We multiply that by the 10 curtains, and we get 3,652.4. Now let's divide that sum by the total of the 100 loops plus the 100 knobs from the 2 junctures, or 200. So 3,652.4 divided by 200 equals 18.262, the exact size of the cubit. So now here's a little more fun math. Now we're going to take the 50 years of a Jubilee cycle and multiply it by 365.24 days in order to get the number of days to a Jubilee cycle. We take 50 years, multiply that by the 365.24, and that gives us a sum of 18,262 days. Wow. Now that is math. So we can wrap our minds around how big these curtains were. Let's add up the curtain size using the cubit of 18.262 inches, converting it into numbers that we, modern man, can relate to. So each panel is 28 cubits times 18.262 inches. That gives us a sum of 511.33 inches. We'll divide that by 12 inches to give us the footage, which is 42.61 feet. You divide that by 3 to get the yardage, which is 14.2 yards. So these panels were 14.2 yards long, or 42.61 feet, by 4 cubits high. So again, we'll multiply the 4 cubits by 18.262, and that equals 73 inches, or about 6 feet tall. So now isn't that interesting? Because the sides of the nomadic yurt were also 6 feet tall. Therefore, one combined side of 5 28 cubit panels are equal to 2,556.65 inches, or 213 feet, which is 71 yards, making the overall length of the 10 curtains, when connected together, of 426 feet long. Now, if we have 426 feet, we can make that into a circular space that would be equivalent to 135 feet, or 45.2 yards. Okay? So in a circular formation, we would get 45 yards out of these 10 curtains. Now in the Hebrew, what is interesting is this 426, number 426 in Hebrew, is the word Elah, meaning God. And the number 135 is Aden, meaning Eden. So these curtains are a reflection of our Eloah and Eden. Whereas if we used the larger royal cubit, there would be an overall total of 480 feet, a 54-foot difference. Now, the Hebrew word number 480 is Elah, meaning alas, woe, and is from the root word Allah, meaning to wail and lament. So the Hebrews used the 18.262-inch cubit in the construction of the tabernacle, as it has Yahuwah seal on it. So as I was working through the study, and I was developing these pictures and things for the study, I was sending them off to different people that I can bounce these things off of. And I sent the picture of the curtains to another one of my sisters, Kava. And she's another one of the very few people I have to run calendar concepts by. And she came back with how it reminded her of a picture I had sent her years ago of the sun gates found in Enoch, which is the representation of the yearly circular cycle of the sun. Not sure why I didn't see that, but it's definitely a line up there. You can see these two comparisons of this graphic. Loops and knobs represent the very important time of release, the 50th year of the Jubilee. The loops and knobs are the vertical connection between heaven and earth. Working down from the top, or the salvage side, the loops and knobs come together to make the tabernacle. Loops and knobs are still used today in tent-making applications. We have a dome tent that we use for Sukkot, and all of its doors and window flaps use loops and knobs to keep them open. Loops and knobs are also how we connect our solid walls to each other in our screened kitchen tent. So if we join the curtains according to traditional thought along the long side, that would leave a set of loops and knobs doing nothing. They would basically be laying in the dirt. If the linen curtains were covering the structure over the top and down the sides, like we traditionally see in pictures people have drawn. But if we use discernment and follow the instructions without prejudice, we quickly realize that once all the pieces are joined together, half for the south side and half for the north, with its loops and knob openings facing east and west, this forms a circle, or perhaps octagonal, as revealed in the 280 cubits, a size about half a football field. What? I mean, that's huge. They also are mirrored in the movements of the planet Venus, which happens to be the only planet thought of in the feminine. During Venus's 8-year cycle, she conjuncts with the sun 10 total times, 5 while a morning star and 5 while an evening star. We find this paralleled in the tale of the 10 virgins. 5 were prepared and kept their lamps burning bright, and 5 were unprepared, not having enough oil in their lamps, and they went dark. The bright morning star and the dark evening star. So let's take a moment to look at Venus. After completing the camp placement, I immediately noticed that the camps of the Levites resembled the Venus-Rose cycle. Out of all the stars mentioned in the Bible, Venus is the only wandering star spoken of that is connected to prophecy. Of Venus, Peter writes, "And we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you will do well to heed, as a light that shines in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. 2 Peter 1:19. Because Venus is one of the wandering stars, it is referred to as the shepherd's star, called by the names Hesperus as the evening star and the morning star Phosphorus, the light bringer. Job speaks of Venus. Job 38:32. Will you open the Mazzaroth in its time, and Hesperus with its tail will you lead it? That's from the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And out of the DRB we read, Canst thou bring forth the day star in its time, and make the evening star to rise upon the children of the earth? Now, although some translations use the word Mazzaroth in Job 38:32, which we commonly apply to mean the zodiac constellations, or the zodiac stars, it can also be translated as planet. Job 38:7. Where were you when the morning stars praised me all together, and the sons of Elohim rejoiced triumphantly? At one time, Hallel, Lucifer, was called a morning star. Isaiah 14:12-13. How you have fallen from heaven, O Hallel. That's Hebrew 1966. O morning star, son of the dawn, you have been thrown down from the earth, you who destroyed the nations of the world. So just a little personal side note on which events we believe altered time in the mass history of our earth. So at the original creation in Leo, as I spoke of earlier, long before Adam came along, the earth was in an upright position, unadulterated in every way, with a perfect circular orbit and 360-day year. Then war pursued in heaven, and because of the sin of Hallel, he was thrown to the earth. His home, the fiery stone of the planet Rahab, was destroyed. Psalms 89:10. You have broken Rahab to pieces, as one slain. You have scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. So this sent debris through the heavens, not only creating the asteroid belt we have today, but scarring Mars. We've all seen pictures of this big scar on Mars, reversing Venus's rotation, and slamming debris into Earth, causing the Earth to become dark and lifeless. This hit moved the Earth off its axis enough to create the 364-day year of Adam's day, in Enoch's time. For 7 generations from Adam to Enoch, the Earth experienced a 364-day year. Then sin, once again, caused the heavens and the earth to be shaken. In Enoch chapter 65, we find a passage where Noah is afraid he is going to die due to all the shaking and changing of the planet. He seeks out his grandfather Enoch and speaks of the tilted earth. Now, how would Noah know the earth had tilted? Because from his perspective, all the stars in the heavens were different. They were in a different place. And he was scared. This tilt at the time of the flood brought the earth to the position we know today of 23.5 plus or minus degrees off its axis. This added 1.25 more days to the year beyond that of the time of Adam's creation, increasing the solar cycle to 365.24 days. Revelation 2:26. And the one overcoming, and the one keeping my works until the end, I will give to him the authority over the nations, and he will shepherd them with an iron staff. They are broken to pieces like clay vessels, as I also have received from my Father, and I will give to him the morning star. So in the end, Yahweh took away from Hallel the designation of morning star and gave it to Yahshua. Revelation 22:16. I am Yahshua. I am the one who sent my angel to tell all of you these things for the ecclesia. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star. From out of the womb, before the morning star, I engendered you. Interesting verse. Now, engender means to procreate. It also means to regenerate. To be regenerated indicates being reformed from one thing to another. Now, Yahuwah chose to engender, that is to regenerate, his anointed Malach, his anointed angel, into human form through the womb so that he could be the kinsman of mankind, enabling sinful man to return to Yahuwah. Baruch Hashem. Now the Most High Eloah announced this before the audience of the morning star Hallel, aka Lucifer, that the anointed cherub Yahshua would be given the job of coming out of the womb. I will proclaim, says the king, what Yahuwah has declared to me. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Hebrews 1:5. For whom said he at some time or other of the angels, you are my son, I today engender you. And again, I will be to him for father, and he will be to me for son. Verse 6. And again, whenever he should bring in the firstborn into the inhabitable world. So whenever he should bring him into the world, he says that all the angels of Eloah do obstinance to him. And indeed the angels, he says, the one making the angels and his spirits, and ministers of fire of flame. But to the Son, your throne, O Eloah, into the eon of the eons, into the ages of the age, a rod of uprightness is the rod of your kingdom. So in other words, Yahuwah does as he pleases with his angels. If he says, be fire, they are fire. If he calls them to be wind, they are wind. But this anointed cherub will only ever have one designation, the begotten Son, who sits at the right hand and rules his Father's kingdom. Hebrews 1:9. You loved righteousness and detested lawlessness. On account of this, Yahuwah your Eloah anointed you with oil of exaltation above your partakers. This is in the Greek, and it means above your associates. So this anointed Malach was chosen from among his peers. And I believe that Hallel's uprising was the direct result of Yahuwah not choosing him, as he was the most beautiful created being. Now, unlike the anointed Malach Yahshua, Hallel was full of vanity and loved lawlessness. When all the angels were commanded to bow down to the first son, Hallel wasn't having it, and lost his standing as morning star, placed forever in opposition as the evening star Hesperus. Revelation 22:16 says that the anointed first son is the root and offspring of David, the bright and morning star. Thus the planet Venus is a metaphor for the return of the Messiah, confirmed in 2 Peter and the Venus prophecy, authenticated in the heavens at the Messiah's birth through the Virgin's womb. So it is believed that a rare occultation or conjunction of Venus with a first magnitude star had occurred, leading the Magi to the young Messiah. It is recorded that a rare triple conjunction of Jupiter, Virgo, and the star Regulus, the heart of the lion, happened in September 3 BC, around the time of the Feast of New Oil. 9 months later, in June of 2 BC, the month of Shavuot, Jupiter and Venus merged again in the constellation of Leo near the star Regulus for a close conjunction. So a conjunction occurs when two or more astronomical objects appear to be close to each other in the sky. Now, one of my favorite conjunctions is when the planets Venus and Jupiter, along with the crescent moon, come close together to make a smiley face in the heavens. And I just love the little smiley face in the sky. So whereas an occultation is an event that occurs when one object passes directly in front of the other object, occultations of Venus and first magnitude stars are extremely rare. In the case of two of the brightest objects in the sky, like Venus, and the first magnitude star like Regulus, would be exceptionally bright against the night sky. Now add a third bright light, like Jupiter, and wow, that would have caught my eye. I already have to look twice at Venus sometimes to make sure it's not some kind of strange UFO in the skies, because we get quite a few strange lights in the sky here. So the planet Venus and the bright star Regulus, of course the heart of Leo, most recently swept closest together in our sky on the morning of October 2nd, 2020, the first day of the priestly Sukkot. Due to the planet's 8-year cycle, Venus will again meet up with Regulus for a super close conjunction in early October of 2028, 2036, and 2044. But this meetup of Venus and Regulus on October 1st, 2024, prep day for Sukkot, will be a super special event because Venus will actually occult Regulus on that day. The bride and groom consummate. So not only is it close to it, it's going to occult it. They're coming together on that day. The year 2044, it seems like it's going to be a rockin' year for signs in the heavens. Not only do we see this Venus-Regulus marriage happening, which is rare and awesome in of itself, but an incredibly rare, never seen before phenomenon up and beyond this occultation will be completed this year as well. Now the sun and the moon do a dance called a tetrad cycle. In astronomy, a tetrad is a set of 4 total lunar eclipses within 2 consecutive years. In other words, it's 4 blood moons in a row, about 6 months apart. The term comes from the Greek word tetras. And I don't know about you, but I used to play me some Tetris. So that just means a group of 4. Remember, little Tetris had its little 4 blocks, and you could rearrange them in different ways. Anyway, and make them all together. I'm sure a lot of you know how to play Tetris. So that's what that means. Because of the Jewish use of the moon, many tetrad alignments, many of these blood moons, happen to coincide with Jewish religious observances. So this next tetrad cycle will happen in the years 2032 and 2033. The last cycle took place in 2014 and 2015, which we talk a lot about this 2015 event in many of our studies. But a super tetrad is a series of 8 total lunar eclipses in a row, plus a total or annular solar eclipse. So a total solar eclipse is when the whole sun is covered, and an annular is where we just see the ring of fire. So that's just really dependent on the 2 angles of the sun-moon relationship there, whether we get a total or an annular. So in a super tetrad, we're going to get one or the other, along with the series of lunar eclipses over a period of about 18 months. Now, interestingly, it takes Venus 18 months to make one of her 5 petals of her rose. So one petal takes 18 months. So far, according to TimeDate.com, their data shows that they have only found 2 super tetrad cycles in all of history. The years 2043 through 2044 and the years 3707 and 3708. Thus, 2044 at the conclusion of an exceptionally rare super tetrad cycle, there will be the extraordinary event of Venus's occult with Regulus, October 1st, marking the wedding feast celebration. Hallelujah. Baruch Hashem. So I think it would be prudent for us to keep an eye on Venus and get to know how she works, so we will know when she speaks her prophecy. This perhaps is the reason that much of the camp's layout reflects the movements of Venus. The Venus cycle creates a cosmic heartbeat. It takes, as I said, 18 months for this wandering star to complete one full petal of her 5-petal rose, and 8 years to complete all 5 petals, as Venus returns to the starting constellation. Venus, being an inferior planet, now being an inferior planet means that it's simply between the Earth and the Sun. And I like to refer to it as more of an interior planet instead of an inferior planet. It makes more sense. It's interior. It's between us and the Sun. Anyway, so Venus cannot travel any farther than 2 zodiac constellations from either side of the Sun because of her rotation around the Sun. So this is why she has 5 petal loops, during which Venus goes through 5 retrograde periods. Venus's reliable 8-year cycle would have been a useful span of time for ancient sky watchers, who relied heavily on natural cycles to mark time. Within those 8 years, Venus and the Sun conjunct 10 total times, 5 while a morning star and 5 while an evening star. As I mentioned before, this is reflected in the 10 linen curtains that are coupled together 5 and 5. Now, Venus's retrograde cycle lasts 40 days. Now, does that time period sound familiar to anyone? When the planet is retrograde, it appears to be moving backwards from our perspective on Earth. Another clear sign in the heavens that numbers days. Yahweh just blows me away with his mathematics and his sacred geometry. But just wait. I have some better math still to come. Job 9, 7 through 9. The one speaking to the sun, and it does not rise, and accordingly he set a seal around the stars. The one stretching the heaven alone, and walking upon the sea. Now Pisces is in the heavenly area called the sea, which marks this age, Pisces. as upon a floor, the one making Pallades and Hesperus and Arcturus and the chambers of the south. So what is the meaning of Yahweh sealing the stars? At first we may think that he is closing them up, but it is deeper than that. A seal is a mark of delegated authority. It indicates authenticity and prevents tampering. A seal also serves to protect or bind the contents beneath it. The king places his seal upon an edict to make it legal and valid. The importance attached to a seal in antiquity is so essential that without one, no document was regarded as authentic. Yahweh not only set the way back to the Garden of Set Times in the stars, he replicated it within the Hebrew wilderness camp, then placed upon them his seal. Next we have the goat hair curtains, because for all of its intrinsic qualities, linen canvas is not extremely waterproof due to its natural nature. Therefore, Yahweh provided a waterproofing layer to surround the linen curtains with. So Moses gets similar instructions to assemble 11 curtains grouped into 5 and 6 panels. This set is larger than the first, but assembled pretty much the same way. Exodus 26:7. And you shall make hide coverings of hair for protection upon the tent. 11 hide coverings you shall make them. The Septuagint calls this hair cloth mohair. Now, mohair is sourced from the fleece of Angora goats, which boast long, lustrous locks. Solomon compares his love's hair to that of the flock of goats, not as an insult, but a compliment due to their lovely, long flowing locks. One of the oldest natural fibers in use today, mohair is known for being very strong, durable, and resilient. It is also incredibly soft and lustrous, which makes it a popular choice for making clothing, blankets, rugs, and other textile products. Mohair yarn is resistant to wrinkles and stretching, ensuring longevity in finished projects. The fibers have a distinctive scale structure, imparting a silky smooth texture and a natural sheen to the yarn. The hair color is not mentioned in Scripture, but it is widely understood to be black mohair. This we also see in the Bedouin tents made with mohair canvas. There is also a confirmation of this idea again in the Song of Solomon, where the Shulamite compares her skin color to the tents of Kedar. Song of Solomon 1, verse 5. I am black, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar. Now, most Anatolian goat breeds have black hair, but also the black color works to cool down the temperature of the interior of the tent during the summers and heats the interior temperature during the winter. Mohair fabric is impenetrable by animals and insects which have scales under their bodies. Snakes, scorpions, centipedes, spiders, and other venomous creatures cannot walk on the mohair because the hairs going out of the surface of the fabric form a very spiky area which irritates their scales and prevents them from entering the openings between the loosely woven warps and wefts. Now, felting the goat's hair fabric would increase this natural pest deterrent. The felt that covers the nomadic yurt is usually made of hair sheep's wool or goat's hair. So a hair sheep is a little different than one of these curly sheep. So they have long hair like these long-haired goats. And they make the fabric and then they felt it. So to felt this fabric, the hair is beaten and crushed so that microscopic barbs in the wool fibers interlock, forming a solid cloth. Now, whether the mohair was felted or not, we cannot determine from Scripture alone. But given the nature of tent making at the time of the Israelites, it is likely that it was. The goat hair absorbs rainwater, causing all the small holes between the warps and the wefts to puff up and completely close, providing protection from the rain and wind. But on a sunny day, the small holes of the fabric aerate the inside of the tent. The mohair also provides a net view from which the outside can be seen more or less, so a person passing through the encampment area can be easily seen and recognized. But from outside, it is impossible to see inside the tent. Now Moses was instructed to make 11 mohair curtains, one set of 5 and one set of 6. Now the first thing that comes to mind is that 5 times 6 is 30, a number of days in the month. Now the number 6 is the first unitary perfect number and smallest perfect number because its divisors equal itself. 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. Just as 28 was a perfect number used in the equation of the linen curtain construction. In addition, a unitary perfect number is when we include the number itself and dividing it by 2. The result is the number itself. So we have 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 6, which equals 12, divided by 2 equals 6. Perfect numbers are rare. The ancient Greeks recognized only 4 perfect numbers: 6, 28, 496, and 8,128. The creation cycle ends after the 52nd Sabbath. The number 52 is a decagonal number. Now, due to the fact that the solar cycle is no longer synced with creation, we now have 1 or 2 solar days left after the creation cycle is completed. As I mentioned earlier, these days are absorbed by the camp of Moses on the time wheel. So depending on it being a leap year or not, the priest would know if there was 1 or 2 days, the days out of time, before the creation cycle began anew. And this would be verified with the 4th day sign of the due east rising of the sun. Thus, between the last Sabbath of the cycle and the 4th day sign, there are 5 or 6 days depending on the leap. And perhaps the curtains were used to keep track of the leap years. Now, one reason this would be is that since Babylonian times, the leap years, along with the different lunar cycles, were used to predict the lunar solar eclipses. 223 lunar synodic months is nearly equal to the 242 lunar draconic months. Now, a draconic month has to do with the lunar nodes, and I will let you research that independently. I've talked about it some in my other moon videos. The difference between these two intervals is just 52 minutes over a period of 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. So this is known as the Saros cycle that predicts eclipses. Now, the sun also has an 11-year cycle. And currently, as I am writing this study, we are at the peak of this cycle. Every 11 years, the sun undergoes an epic transformation. Its magnetic poles reverse. Like on Earth, the sun has magnetic north and magnetic south. But unlike Earth, whose poles flip on the order of hundreds of thousands of years, the sun's shuffle is a regular occurrence. Leading up to the pole reversal is a time of increasingly intense magnetic activity on the surface of the sun. And that's what's happening right now with these large magnetic storms. Scientists predict we'll reach solar maximum around July 2025. So over the next year, expect to hear more about solar flares and storms, perhaps more frequent opportunities to see the northern lights as well. Exodus 26:8. And the length of one curtain shall be 30 by the cubit, and the width 4 by the cubit, for one curtain, one measure to the 11 curtains. So basically, all 11 curtain panels are going to be 30 by 4. So each panel is 30 cubits times 18.262 inches. That gives us a total sum of 548 inches, or 45.66 feet long by 6 feet tall, the same height as the linen curtains. So Exodus 26:9 tells us that we shall couple the 5 curtains by themselves and the 6 curtains by themselves, and shall double over the 6th curtain in the forefront of the tent. So 5 30-cubit curtains joined together are 150 cubits times 18.262 gives us 2,739.3 inches, or 228.27 feet, or 76 yards. And 150 degrees is the measure of the interior angle of a regular dodecagon. Now, a regular dodecagon, as we had talked earlier, is a figure with 12 sides of the same length. The interior angle of the regular dodecagon is equal to 150 degrees, and the exterior is equal to 30 degrees. So if we take the 150 degrees and multiply that by 12, we get 1,800. Now, 18 is an interesting number. Ezekiel tells us that New Jerusalem has a circumference of 18,000 cubits. So it would appear that the tabernacle was a mini model of New Jerusalem. So 30 degrees times 12 sections is, of course, the expression of the prophetic 360-day year, which returns with New Jerusalem. 6 30-cubit curtains equals 180 cubit times 18.262 inches equals 3,287.16 inches, or 273.93 feet, or 91.31 yards. So 180 is an abundant number with its proper divisors summing up to 366. An abundant number is where all divisors added together exceed the number. Remember, our perfect number, all the divisors added up equaled the number. So in this abundant number, the divisors exceed the number. Thus, the divisors of 180 equal 366, or the number of solar days in the leap cycle, which I had thought originally that the 5 and 6 curtains represented, the 2 counts of days after the 52nd Sabbath until the 4th day of creation, 5 days in a regular year and 6 days in the leap year. Interestingly, if we add the 180 cubits to the 150 cubits, so we're adding the 6 panels to the 5 panels, we have 330 cubits. Divided by 12 is 27.5, or the length of a lunar sidereal month. Half of the spherical circle is 180 degrees, which is why Enoch breaks down the movement of the sun into 18 parts. He is detailing in fractional equation the shadow movement across our spherical planet. All that our Creator builds is mathematically connected. Now remember that the Venus rose takes 18 months to complete 1 petal, and the sorrow cycle is 18 years. So I looked up the Hebrew word H18 in the concordance, and this word is Abus. And Abus means a manger or stall, a crib. It is most usually translated as a stall, which is a place to keep your animals. And kind of funny if you think about it, the gates of New Jerusalem create a stall to keep the livestock, or us, in. Or, if you rather, a crib for his children. 18,000 cubits. We have an 18,000 cubit size crib coming for us from the Creator. Hallelujah. Okay, so back to the curtains. Moses was instructed to fold back the 6th curtain halfway back towards the front, or the east side of the tent. And you shall make 50 loops on the edge of 1 curtain, the last at the juncture, and 50 loops on the edge of the 2nd curtain that joins. And you shall make 50 hooks of bronze, and you shall put the hooks in the loops and join the tent together, and it shall become one. Now the mohair felt curtains come together like the linen curtains, with 50 loops and knobs, or hooks, to create a door to the east and a door to the west, designating again the 50 count of a jubilee. Exodus 26:12. And the overlapping part of the rest of the curtains of the tabernacle, the half curtain that remains, shall hang on the back of the tabernacle. Verse 13. A cubit from this side and a cubit from that side of the superior part of the hair coverings, of the length of the hair coverings of the tent. And it will be to cover up the sides of the tent. On this side and on that side, it should be covered. That's out of the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And the King James Version reads, And the remnant that remaineth of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remaineth, shall hang over the backside of the tabernacle. So if I'm understanding this correctly, between verses 9 and 13, it is instructing us that half the length of the 11th curtain, or 15 cubits, hangs in the front as a front door flap, and half, or 15 cubits of its length, hangs in the back, again as a door flap. Then each of these door flaps overlaps the tent wall by a cubit. This would make the door openings 14 cubits each, or about 21 feet. So we're told that we have 5 curtains and 11 curtains. And then we're told that half of the 11th curtain goes across the front in the east, and half of the 11th curtain goes across the back in the west. So we have 2 door openings that are being created here in the east and the west. And then out of those 15 cubits, because that's going to be part of the circumference, so we're going to have to add the curtain lengths with the doors. But it's telling us that 1 cubit of those 15 cubits overlaps. So it's like the flap wraps around back onto the main body of the tabernacle. So it folds over, and probably so it wasn't easily blown open, I would imagine. So this makes both sides of the curtain walls equivalent to 5 curtains each, and half of the 11th curtain for the front door and half for the back door. So we have an even amount, and then 2 halves of the curtains. Makes perfect sense on how you would want to wrap this structure. So 10 curtains equals 300 cubits, plus the 2 doors of 14 cubits each, or 28 cubits total, gives us a total of 328 cubits, or 499.16 feet, which equals 166.38 yards. So the total length for the circumference. And if we take that as a total length for our circumference, that gives us a diameter of 52 yards. So that makes a circle of 52 yards. The number of Sabbaths in the creation cycle. I mean, I can't make this up. The math is the witness. That's the evidence. We have the math. Okay, so that was a lot of math, and I hope I didn't lose you there. But now let's take a look at the side-by-side comparison of the total of the linen curtains and the goat curtains. So the linen curtains cover an area of 426 feet long, or 142 linear yards, which gives us a 45-yard diameter. And the mohair curtains cover an area of 499 feet long, or 166 linear yards, not diameter, but linear yards, which then gives us the diameter of 52 yards, a difference of 24 linear yards, or 7 yards diameter. 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week. This is the difference between the linen and mohair curtains. So once we put the frame together, I think we'll get the picture as to why there is a difference in the sizes. I believe that the linen was attached to the inside of the frame like a wall liner, and the goat's hair was attached to the outside of the frame, which had a depth of 18 inches of lumber between the 2 curtains. So by having this goat's hair on the outside and the linen on the inside, with the frame between the 2 curtains, and that frame, like I said, is 18 inches deep, this would give the tent a set of lungs. This is an air insulation buffer that allows the structure to breathe in order to keep mold and mildew from developing. And we will see that there is an additional structure added to the back of the tabernacle, right where we're told to overlap the goat hair curtains. Now, before we hang these curtains, I have to ask myself, if all of the Creator's time is circular, the Sabbath cycles and the Hagag festal cycles, the solar, lunar, stellar, and planetary cycles, if nature is naturally round from the planets to the living cell, soap bubbles and raindrops, the circle of life, then why not the heart of Yahweh's timepiece? Could it be anything but circular by design? Notice that the curtains are designed to cover 2 sides, north and south, not 4. The 2 sections join the 2 sides of the circle together at the east and west points with loops and knobs. Next in the instructions, we learn that the poles are set to the south and to the north, thus dividing the tabernacle into 2 halves of a circular structure, north and south. Exodus 26:18. And you shall make the boards of the tabernacle 20 boards on the south side, southward. Verse 20. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, 20 boards. So we have 40 boards, which equal the 40 days or the retrograde of Venus. Also, it is important to understand and remember that both the linen curtains and the mohair curtains are the same height, but there is a 7-yard or 21-foot difference in their diameter. So this isn't just one curtain fitting snugly against another, as the traditional model would have you believe. What did they do with all that extra material? Pull it out further on the sides, leaving a large dead space and ignoring what is going on in the front and the back? And by doing that, that would leave the linen curtains vulnerable to pest intrusion on both sides. Remember, it is the mohair that makes the tabernacle pest-free. Therefore, if the linen liner and the goat hair fencing curtain are circular, then it would only be reasonable that the roof of the tent be domed and not flat, as shown in so many artist depictions. Exodus 26:14. And you shall make the covering of the tent skins of rams dyed red, and coverings of skin of blue on top. So this is all the detail that we're given for the roof of the tabernacle. Now on the traditional model, we see all these layers piled one on top of the other, then stretched out and pegged down at the corners. Sometimes with a pitched roof, and sometimes as a flat roof, with wild interpretations as to what these leather skins were. Many translations employ hides of animals that you wouldn't find anywhere near the desert landscape that the Israelites traveled through. Now, the first problem with all those layers being piled one on top of the other is that it would trap in the heat of the desert. And why would Yahuwah use breathable materials like linen and mohair just to cover them up with a non-breathable leather? The instructions say that the linen and the mohair are to cover the sides of the tabernacle, and the leather is a covering for the top. No dimensions are given, as it is implied that it just fits over the top based on the measurements already given for the base. Furthermore, we can get an idea as to how big the blue leather piece was, because it was lowered down over the Ark of the Covenant after it was covered with the linen veil curtains, which I've not talked about, that simply surrounded the Ark of the Covenant, creating the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant in the center had a veil of curtains around it. Then we had the linen curtains farther out, making the tabernacle, and then the protection curtains on the outside. So the blue leather that was part of the roof was to be lowered down over the Ark of the Covenant after the linen veil used to mark off the Holy of Holies surrounding it. So the veil would go over the Ark, and then the blue leather would come down and be covered over the Ark to act as its weather shield. And it certainly did not take half of a football-size filled leather to cover the Ark. That would just be cumbersome and heavy. And let's not forget that all of this had to be mobile. So as we build the structure, we will see that the blue leather is directly over the Holy of Holies in the center of the tabernacle. Numbers 4:5. And Aaron shall enter, and his sons, whenever the camp should lift away, and they shall lower the veil, the one overshadowing or surrounding, and they shall cover with it the ark of the testimony. Verse 6. And they shall place upon it an overcovering skin of blue, and they shall put it upon it a garment entirely of blue from above. So right there, we're being told this blue is the blue that is above the ark. And they shall insert the bearing poles. Okay, so if it was a flat roof, like we see in traditional models, it just does not work in the real world, where there is rain and blowing sand. So without a slope, what would happen? Water and debris would pool, causing the roof to sag and in need of constant maintenance. And now we also need to ask, how in the traditional model did they lower the blue skin from above without exposing the ark, if the blue layer was placed last on top of all the other 3 layers? So in a traditional model, all these layers are stacked. You have linen, goat's hair, leather, leather. So you got 4 layers. How do you get that top blue layer to come down without exposing the ark? You'd have to remove all the other layers first. They couldn't. For Sukkot, we use an 8-man dome tent to camp in. And we also have a traditional square pitched roof kitchen tent that I mentioned earlier. So our dome tent has withstood 60-mile-an-hour plus wind gusts. Due to its dome design, it made it through. Whereas our kitchen tent gets blown over every time. There is hardly a Sukkot that we don't lose a kitchen tent, regardless how much we tie it down. It's because of the different styles of structure. Domed is more resilient to weather and wind. And we have to realize the tabernacle survived and was used for over 400 years, 420 years to be exact. So that should attest to the sturdiness of the design. So that takes us to the frame. So next, let's look at the frame instructions to see if this would also support a round domed structure. Exodus 36:20. And he made posts for the tent from out of incorruptible wood. Verse 21. 10 cubits was the one post, and 1 cubit and a half the width of one post. So I buy a lot of lumber. As I mentioned, my hubby and I are currently doing a house restoration, and I have built a few walls in my day, not to mention a chicken coop or 2. And when I go to the lumber store, I will ask for 3 dimensions. For example, to build a wall, I would use a 2x4x8 stick of wood. Now that tells us that it is 8 feet long by 2 inches wide by 4 inches deep. Now if we apply this to what we're told here, a post is 1 by 1/2 by 10 cubits. So the modern world math for one post would be 18.262 inches deep by 9.131 inches wide by 182.62 inches long, because we're 1 cubit by 1/2 cubit by 10 cubits. So that's about 9 inches wide by 1.5 feet deep by 15 feet long. Exodus 36:22. 2 joints for the one post, resting headlong against another to another. Thus he made all the posts of the tent. That's from the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And from the literal version, it says, the one board was connected by 2 pins to another. So he did to all the boards of the tabernacle. So we're told that the 2 joints of one post resting headlong against another to another. So on either end, their heads. Thus he made all the posts of the tents to connect by 2 pins, one to the other. Okay, so this word joints in the Greek means an anchor as crooked. And it's from the word G43, meaning a bend, an arm as curved. So a bend like in your elbow. So this is talking about like an elbow bend. So this is what this is describing as this joint. Exodus 36:23. And he made 20 posts by the side of one towards the south, and 40 sockets of silver he made for the 20 posts, 2 sockets to 1 post for both its parts, the 2 sockets to the other 1 post for both its parts. So in the Hebrew, this word socket means controller. Working from the south or right side of east, the frame gets constructed. 20 15-foot posts each have a socket and a joint at either end. This is where 2 posts are sistered together, end to end using pins. These socket joints are to bend like the human elbow. So the closest thing I could think of in the modern world that would be along the same mechanics is a type of cardan joint or a clevis with a pin, just as described, which actually fits the scriptural description quite well. Now the King James Version calls these joints tenons, which means an axle or a stay, also means wrist, so apparently something that pivots. Traditionalists line up all these poles, some as individual pillars with huge bases and caps, because they don't know what to do with the hardware. And I've even seen where others have tried to stack these poles to make a big wall. Yet, we can clearly read that they were joined headlong, meaning at their heads, at the ends. My head isn't on my side, it's at my top end. So, that's what it's saying. And on a pole, either side could be the top. Verses 25 and 26. It says, the second side. Now this word side is H6763, and it means rib. Towards the north, 20 posts and 40 sockets for them make of silver. 2 sockets to 1 post for both its parts. 2 sockets for another 1 post for both its parts. So for both its ends, it has a socket. Now in verse 25, the Hebrew word being used to describe these sides, as I said, is the word rib. And it will be used again when describing the wall supports, as we see. So this word is selah, and it means a rib, as curved, hence a side, literally of a person, or figuratively of an object or sky, that is quarter. And in architecture, a timber or plank, a beam, board, plank, rib, side chamber, from H6760. And we go to H6760, it's sala, a primitive root meaning to curve. So ribs wrap around and protect our lungs, whereas these ribs actually create the lungs of the tabernacle when both the linen and mohair curtains are hung, as I mentioned earlier. Also, let's not forget about how these curtains are sistered together. Since there are also no instructions as how the curtains attach to the frame, it would be reasonable to believe that the curtains are tied to the frame with the same threads that sister them together. Now we can figure out how many poles it would take to span the diameter of the tabernacle, since we know how long each pole is, and we know the tabernacle's diameter. So then we can determine how best these posts were used when applying tent making practices. Okay, some more math time. The tabernacle is 52 yards in diameter, and each pole is about 15 feet or 5 yards long. Therefore, it would take about 10 poles to span the diameter. This would leave the tent no pitch or vertical wall support. So let's then look at the rest of the materials we have to work with to see if this is feasible. So the north side mirrors the south side, giving us 40 15-foot poles to span the 52-yard diameter footprint of the curtains. When we link 5 poles together, one pole accounting for the height of the wall, so a 15-foot tall height for the wall, the existing 4 poles of 15 feet would then give us a span of 60 feet, or 20 yards. So doubling to account for both sides, we would have a span of about 40 yards, leaving us a bit short for the 52-yard span of the tent's circumference by about 12 yards, or 144 feet. Thus, recall that according to the instructions, each of these post ends have a joint left over at their heads. That would have to connect to something. Otherwise, why would they be there? So right now, as we're building, we just have these poles kind of hanging out in the air, but they do have something to connect to. So what we need is 8 pieces of lumber to join these ends together. Now this design creates a cap crown which allows for smoke to exhaust out of the tent. Also, we've not yet been given lumber for our door supports either. So let's continue reading through our blueprint. Exodus 36, verse 27. And by the rear of the tent, the part towards the west, he made 6 posts. That's from the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And the King James reads, verse 27, and for the sides of the tabernacle westward, he made 6 boards. So now we have 6 posts of unknown size and function that attach to the back or westward side of the tabernacle. Before, when we were looking at the southward and northward sides, the Hebrew indicated that those poles were ribs, whereas here on the westward side, we have a whole other body part going on here. This word side, H3411, is Eureka, a feminine of H3409, properly the flank, the rear, or recess. And 3409 is Yarek, meaning from an unused root, the thigh, like the thigh of your leg. So, I mean, isn't that fascinating how the tabernacle is constructed like a human body with elbow joints, ribs, and thighs? So we can make an educated guess as to their lengths. Since the goat hair curtains are 4 cubits, or about 6 feet tall, that each of the 6 posts were most likely 4 cubits each, or 6 feet tall. Remember that we have a 21 foot of excess mohair felt curtain in the back, just waiting for a door frame. 6 posts, if coupled together as instructed for the 40 other posts, would create an arched vestibule at the west door, giving that 2 poles would be used for vertical supports for the ends of the curtains to attach to. That would leave us with 4 poles at 6 foot each, or a 20-foot 4 span, an excess of 3 feet, enough length for a slight arch or peak. Now most tents have some sort of vestibule surrounding the main door to act as a windbreak. my one dome tent actually has a full added on vestibule that I can stand up in, which attaches much like is being described here. Now, we aren't given a lot of technical information for these 6 posts, which reminds me of when you get furniture that needs assembled and the instructions are non-existent or translated from Chinese and hard to understand. So consequently, we are forced to rely on common sense. And although we don't know exactly what the tabernacle looked like for sure, we do know what was common and normal for tent making. Plus, we have been given enough information to this point that hopefully the rest of the pieces should just fill in where needed. So continuing with the instructions of these 6 posts, on to verse 28. And it continues and it says, and 2 posts he made at the corner of the tent at its posterior. Verse 29, and they were equal below, and according to the same measurement they were equal, from the heads unto the coupling. Thus he made both the 2 corners. That's out of the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. And the literal version said, on verse 29, that they were doubled from below, and in like manner they were complete to its top. To the first ring he did to both of them for the 2 corners. Next, we are given some corner posts that are also at the posterior or west end of the tabernacle. And coming up soon, we will be given the side wall supports. So these 2 corners create the framework that will support the vestibule's side walls. The side wall supports are running horizontal, and these corner posts are running vertical. So these 2 posts are coupled overhead to reach the doorway frame with rings attached to their tops. So you have 2 posts for one corner and 2 posts for another corner. We have our arched vestibule doorway already in place. So one post is sistered. It said it's sistered to another post of same length. But it's the top. So we have the vertical post coming up. And then it lays across and makes a horizontal overhead support that connects to the rounded vestibule. So it makes one side or one corner of the vestibule. And then the same thing, the second post that we're given does the same thing. Upright, overhead support. Those are the 2 posts that sister together. It says they're sistered together. You have 2 posts that make one corner and 2 posts that make one corner. The 2 posts are sistered and the 2 posts are sistered. Not the 4 posts, just the 2 posts. So given that the priest watched for the due east rising of the sun in the spring and fall, it would be sensible to think that they wouldn't want the east door hindered by extra framework, allowing the east end to completely open, and this would allow the light to shine into the center of the tabernacle on the vernal equinox, employing the tent's main frame posts themselves for the vertical supports of the east side curtains. And we're going to have a center post here soon, so this is going to make a little more sense. Because right now we have a span of about 21 feet in the front. And as on my own dome tent, the door opposite the vestibule door has no kind of wind protection around it at all. It's just part of the tent structure. So that's kind of what we're seeing here in this tent configuration. The vestibule facing west, and then the east side being able to open completely to allow the light to stream in from the vernal equinox. And so I think this is another stumbling block where people think that the tabernacle is rectangular because circles don't have corners, they would argue. Right? Wrong. An extended vestibule would. It's collared. It's connected by a neck. It has to have a corner. Okay, so Exodus 36:30, we're told, and there are 8 boards, and their sockets were 16 sockets of silver, under every board 2 sockets. Well, looky here. One of the items we still need from the materials list are 8 boards with sockets. Notice that these 8 boards have sockets but no joints. And coincidentally, we have 8 boards still hanging out with joints and nothing attached to them. It would seem to reason then that these 8 join with their sockets to the rib pole joints, creating the crown for the head of the tent, serving as a vent for smoke exhaust at the top of the tent. So now it's time to finish off the walls. When I was first thinking that this was a yurt style structure, I was wondering what they used for the side framing of the walls. Now yurts employ lattice work for this. And because lattice has some flexibility, it works quite well for the curved yurt wall. Our next set of instructions answers this question. Exodus 36, verse 1. And he made bars from out of incorruptible wood, 5 to the posts from the one part of the tent, and 5 bars to the posts to the second side. This word is rib of the tent. And 5 bars for the posts to the posterior side of the tent towards the west. Okay, so we have a bunch of posts that are going around the tent. So it would appear that the side walls consist of 5 bars running horizontally between the posts of the main tent frame, starting with the one side, which is the south side, and the second on the north, and the vestibule on the posterior west side, which actually proves that there is an entry addition here. Otherwise, it wouldn't need wall supports. And if we count all the bars needed to go around the room, remember there's 5 for each little section. They're going up the wall. That gives us a place for the curtains to go against. So if we add them all up as instructed, we have 50 bars. A jubilee surrounds the tabernacle. Baruch Hashem. Hallelujah. Yahuwah, it's just amazing. And you can see why I was so amazed by this. And I just don't know how we can deny that it's anything but this. So with the wall supports installed, our round structure is now octagonal in shape. 8 angles of 45 degrees represents the prophetic year, as 8 times 45 is 360. The last piece of the frame is the middle bar that runs east and west, locking it all together. Exodus 36:33. And he made the middle bar. This comes from the Hebrew 1280. To go through the middle of the boards from end to end. That's from the literal version. The Apostolic Bible Polyglot, the same verse says, and the middle bar in between the posts penetrated from one side unto the other side. So notice the word bar is used in both the sidewall material and the center post that runs from east to west between the middle of the 2 ribs. This Hebrew word is barika, and it means bolt, indicating their purpose is to lock or tie the whole structure together. They secured the frame. So the east-west bar supports the roof and center ring. Most likely it is this very center bar that is used to orient the tabernacle due east on the vernal equinox. The dewy sunrise would create a straight line shadow out from the center beam, marking the fourth day of creation and the new festal year. Now that we have all the parts of the structure, the main bar, the wall bars, the ribs, the roof crown, the thigh, the door frames, and the wall curtains, Scripture tells us that an unspecified size of red dyed leather covers the top of the tabernacle, then a blue piece of leather. So again, in the traditional model of the tabernacle, we see all these layers piled one on top of the other. So we must ask, why did the Creator specify certain textiles, like linen and mohair, just to cover the whole thing up with 2 layers of leather? Now that we have seen the blueprint, this structure is the only logical one that makes use of all the materials provided, building a structure that is used throughout nomadic people. So I posed the question, why was the camp 12-sided and the tabernacle 8-sided? Then it dawned on me, the campus is one huge compass rose, with the tabernacle at the hub. The Levite camps marking the midpoints of the compass. One huge compass facing due east. All good scouts know that a clock can be used as a compass and a compass can be used as a clock. 12 sides minus 8 sides equals 4 sides, or quarters of the year. And then if we take 12 divided by 4 equals 3, and 8 divided by 4 equals 2, and 2 plus 3 is 5. We have 5 Levite inner wheel camps that lay within the 4 quarters of the outer wheel camps. Next, the courtyard fencing is installed. I think this is another stumbling block for the traditional rectangular idea of the tabernacle. At first glance, you would think this is a rectangular structure, but the math tells us differently. So let's work it out. Exodus 38:9, from the Apostolic Bible Polyglot we read, "And he made the courtyard, the one toward the south, shrouds for the courtyard from out of linen, 100 by 100. And from the King James Version, that same verse reads, "And he made the court on the south side, southward the hangings of the court were fine twined linen and 100 cubits." So this word hanging, Hebrew 7050, means a sling, also a door screen as if slung across, or a valve of the door itself, a hanging leaf from H 7049. So we go to H 7049, and that word is kala. And it means, it's a primitive root meaning to sling, also to carve as if a circular motion or into light forms. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go forward. Exodus 38:10, their pillars were 20 and their brazen sockets 20. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. Okay, so this word fillet in the Hebrew is 2838, and it's a fence rail or rod connecting posts or pillars. So what we basically have are these pillars that have sockets on top that connect the poles between them so that the courtyard curtains or panels can attach to them. Verse 11, and for the north side of the hangings were 100 cubits. Their pillars were 20, and their sockets of brass 20, and the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. So we have the same on both sides. 38:12, and for the west side were hangings of 50 cubits. Their pillars 10, their sockets 10, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. Verse 13, and for the east side 50 cubits. The hangings on one side of the gate were 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And for the other side of the court gate, on this hand and that hand, were hangings of 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. So the first thing I noticed is that the length of the fence screens divided by their pillars is the sum of 5. We have 100 cubits with 20 pillars, 50 cubits with 10 pillars, and 15 cubits with 3 pillars. 330 cubits of length held up the 66 pillars. 330 divided by 66 gives them the sum of 5. And 66 is a hexagonal number. Remember, too, that the mohair curtains were also a total diameter of 52 yards, and that the court length is equivalent to 53.28 yards in diameter. Now, the traditional rectangular courtyard would not accommodate the size and shape of the tabernacle as an octagon. But if you take that same lineage and make it into a polygon shape, or namely a hexagon, just as the materials indicate, this would enclose the tabernacle, leaving room in the front for the altar and the wash laver. So as we see, the math just cannot lie. It already told us that we had 66 pillars. That is our clue right there. That's the clue, the hexagonal number. So I never imagined on the mountain that day while conversing with Yahuwah that this is what he wanted to show me. I had never heard of the idea of a circular tabernacle, nor did I think it even really mattered. I'm still not sure the full meaning and why this is being revealed at this time. I know this is a controversial thing to present, an octagonal tabernacle, but all the evidence is there. The math works. The pieces fit together like they should. Nothing left over, which is always a good thing, and nothing wanting. And on top of it all, it just makes sense. So I was at a point in the study where I was creating the graphics that I was seeing in my mind, and I had been working on it for a few days, trying to focus in on what the Ruach was showing me. And I got the tribes and the Levites placed. I was given a few more minor adjustments to my understanding. Then I clearly heard in my spirit, send this picture to Sister Charlene. Now I've heard this voice before, and I knew it was a direct order from Yahuwah. But in my flesh, I contended, it's not ready to be seen yet. And again I hear, send it to Charlene. So I didn't argue the second time and thought that she must hold some kind of information that Yahuwah wanted me to have. And oh boy, did she ever. It wasn't just minutes later after sending off these pictures to her that I started getting pictures sent back to me from a book she had that absolutely knocked me on the floor. I was already getting this picture independently when Yahuwah sent confirmation through her that someone else was seeing this too. This was why I was supposed to show Charlene these pictures. Baruch Hashem. From out of Andrew Hoy's book, The House of El Shaddai, God's Dwelling Place Reconsidered, Project 314. I was seeing my visions through someone else's eyes. You can imagine how excited I was. I immediately went to his website, and although I don't agree with all his conjectures, I do believe we are seeing the tabernacle in the same light. I highly recommend you check out his evidence on his website, project314.org, and come to your own conclusions about the octagon tabernacle. There are others as well in the Hebrew movement who have discovered Mr. Hoy's theory, And you can find some of their interviews on YouTube. So after I learned about this from Charlene, I went to YouTube and looked him up, and there are some interviews that he did, one with Rob Skiba and another with Jackson Snyder, and then a few others. But those are some names that you should know in this movement. But regardless of how you view the tabernacle, there is no denying that the leaders of the wilderness camp, to the details of the curtains, that there is an alignment with the motions of the heavens, where we find the creation calendar. The curtains personify the masculine and the feminine. The masculine mohair sun curtains, surrounding as a shield the feminine lunar stellar linen curtains, which compasses the ark of the covenant within its womb. Man, woman, child, the circle of life, where both judgment and mercy sits at the center of the Creator's timepiece. Every cog in the wheel fits together in the tailor-made time machine of our Creator. Praise Yahuwah. Baruch Hashem. And so like I said, I'm not sure what this all is supposed to mean, and I know that there will be more coming. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to contact me at remnantofthelight@gmail.com and our website, remnantofthelight.net. You can find the PDF of this study on that website. So I just want to give Yahuwah all the praise and glory for telling me to get my act together so that he could give me this information that I can share with you and for you to do with what you will. And so before I go, I just want to say thanks for sticking with me throughout this long study. And I'm going to wish you shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.